There is a pattern in history. When crisis arrives, power changes shape. What was once restrained becomes expansive. What once required permission begins to act first. And what is justified as temporary often leaves permanent marks. During the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln confronted the greatest internal crisis the United States had ever faced. But the question is not only what he saved, it is also what changed. Lincoln is remembered as the man who preserved the Union, and whatever criticisms are made, that achievement is not trivial. The nation was breaking apart. War had begun. Lives were already being lost. But crisis does not remove the constitutional question. Sometimes it intensifies it, because emergencies are precisely when limits are most tested. In The Real Lincoln, Thomas J. DiLorenzo argues that Lincoln's presidency represented a turning point in American government, not only because of the Civil War, but because the war became the vehicle for a dramatic expansion of federal and executive power. From this perspective, Lincoln was not merely a wartime president, he was a precedent-setting president. One of the clearest examples was habeas corpus. This ancient legal protection requires government to justify detention before a court. It exists to prevent arbitrary imprisonment, to stop rulers from simply seizing critics and calling it necessary. Yet, during the war, Lincoln suspended it. Thousands were detained, some suspected of sabotage, some accused of aiding rebellion, and some for speech or political opposition. This is where perspective divides. Supporters say, the nation was in rebellion. Rail lines were threatened. Maryland itself was unstable. Washington could have been isolated. Critics respond, that may explain emergency action, but it does not erase constitutional limits. Because once emergency power is normalized, later governments rarely start from zero. They inherit the logic, and often expand it further. Chief Justice Robert B. Taney challenged Lincoln's unilateral suspension of habeas corpus. He argued that such authority belonged to Congress, not the President. Lincoln ignored him. And here we see a recurring tension in Republican government. When speed and legality conflict, power usually chooses speed. The book also details suppression of opposition newspapers, arrest of editors, and military interference with political dissent. This is another old wartime pattern. Criticism becomes dangerous. Opposition becomes suspicious. Dissent becomes rebranded as aiding the enemy. And once that logic begins, free societies enter dangerous territory, because governments rarely censor themselves voluntarily. We often imagine power grabs as something villains do, but history suggests something harder. Many expansions of power happen under pressure, under fear, under sincere belief, under claims of necessity. And this is what makes them persuasive and dangerous. Whether one admires Lincoln or not, his presidency helped establish a stronger model of executive authority. Later presidents during war and emergency could draw from similar logic. National survival, security first, temporary necessity, expanded command, and every generation is told, this time is exceptional. America would face this question again. Under Woodrow Wilson during World War I, dissenters were jailed, Speech was restricted. Critics of the war were prosecuted. Eugene V. Debs was imprisoned for opposing the war. Different war, different president, but a familiar logic. Emergency first, liberty later. Now, fairness requires saying this clearly. Many Americans then and now believe preserving the Union was essential. They argue that disunion would have meant instability, foreign influence, permanent fragmentation, and the collapse of the American experiment. That is a serious argument. But it is not the only argument. Others would ask, why is centralized unity always preferable to local self-government? Why must political borders be preserved at any cost? And whether holding a state together is the same thing as preserving liberty, that is where the real debate begins. Now, defenders of Lincoln make a familiar argument. They say the Union had to be preserved, that fragmentation would have meant chaos, foreign interference, a weakened continent, and the failure of the American experiment. That argument has force, but only if we assume that preserving a centralized political union is the highest political good. Many would dispute that. Because from another perspective, the first question is not, was the Union preserved? It is, was liberty preserved? Did individuals become freer? Did power become more limited? Did citizens gain more control over the governments above them? Or did authority become more distant, more centralized, more permanent? A decentralized order carries its own advantages. Multiple states, competing systems, the ability to move, the ability to compare, the ability, in some measure, to vote with one's feet. When power is concentrated in one center, there are fewer exits and fewer restraints. So the real historical debate may not be union or disunion, but centralization or decentralization, consolidation or dispersed authority, political unity or human liberty, and those are not always the same thing. Lincoln may have preserved the Union, but preserving a state and preserving freedom are not identical achievements. Sometimes history celebrates what was held together, while overlooking what was surrendered. That is why this question still matters, because every generation is told, more power now, for stability, for necessity, for unity, for security, and every generation must decide what those words are worth. In the next episode, we examine another controversial claim from the book. Was slavery truly the center of Lincoln's political rise, or was economic centralization the deeper thread? I'll see you in the next episode.